Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior, respected, and accomplished leader from San Francisco, USA, Chitra Nayak. Chitra, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Chitra is a board director. She's a board member of Infosys and several other listed companies. She's an executive advisor at the Boston Consulting Group. She's the co-founder of the Salesforce Women Network and Neythri, a community for South Asian professional women. So, Chitra, my first question for you. You began your career as an engineer before taking on global leadership roles. What experiences most shaped your approach to leadership and growth?
So it's interesting because I think as an engineer, and especially in your early years, you think it's all about the data and
Hmm.
about the analysis. And as you go along in your career, and in my case, when you get broader, I went to business school, and I took on leadership roles in a variety of companies. I think you realize that, of course, data is always important,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, understanding the motivation of the people around you, what makes them tick, why is something important, all those things become equally, if not more important,
Yeah.
in your ability to have impact.
Hmm. Well said. At BCG and later at Salesforce, what were some of the most transformative lessons that influenced how you lead and build teams today?
So I think there are three elements that
Yeah.
I will bring up.
Hmm.
The first was my learning, as I mentioned before, that it is about the relationships and it's really therefore about the trust
Hmm.
that you get if you
Hmm.
have regular communication. So I ran global teams, and really connecting at least once a month with all my business partners was vital, especially in a fast changing environment. If you don't build the trust when things go wrong,
Hmm.
it's much harder to come to conclusion. So I'd
Hmm.
say the first is building trust.
Yeah.
The second is that there's this concept called radical candor. I don't know if you've come
Yeah.
across it, but it's a book by Kim Scott when she was at
Hmm.
Facebook. And there's a 2 by 2 sort of matrix, and I fit very squarely into the sharing, that of caring with your, care for your people
Hmm.
and being direct. I think that combination of two, especially in a fast-moving environment like Salesforce,
Hmm.
was very important.
Hmm.
And the third thing is you really need to bring people with you for long-term sustainable success on any initiative. And
Yeah.
sometimes you have to lose the battle to win the war. So
Very
I'd
well
say those
said.
are three things that I would enunciate.
Very interesting. I love these. Build trust, ensure there's candor, and carry people with you. Great reasons. Thank you. Looking back, Chitra, were there any key turning points of failures that taught you resilience or shifted your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, I was told once by one of the, let's say, the number two person at Salesforce, who
Hmm.
initially had actually brought me in. So I knew he had my best interests in mind. 5 years in, he said to me, you really need to get a better spidey sense of the politics. And I
Hmm.
don't know if, that's a common term, but in the US, it's a very
Yeah.
common term.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that instinctive understanding of politics. And it made me think very hard because I, in the past, had always said, oh, I was very proud of saying I don't get involved with the politics, I
Hmm.
don't matter. But actually, the reality is, as I said earlier, politics is another way of saying, do you understand what makes people tick, why they
Correct.
do what they do?
Correct.
And so I think that for me was a turning point. It
Hmm.
also helped me because he said to me, you should actually go find a really fast moving part of the business,
Hmm.
but that is a small but rapidly growing, needs somebody with your strategic capability and is not in the mainstream. And that is
Hmm.
exactly how I ended up being COO of the platform business unit, which at that point was tiny at
Hmm.
Salesforce and is now the third leg of the stool. And so
Hmm.
it was interesting that that advice led me down a path that was very much the right one for me,
Hmm.
but it's advice I carry with me now in all
Hmm.
circumstances.
What a great response. Thank you. You helped drive Salesforce's growth from 300 million to over 5 billion. What practices or principles made this possible?
So Salesforce and the CEO at Salesforce,
Hmm.
Mark Benioff, always said it's about customer success.
Hmm.
And it was deeply held and deeply felt. I was there for 8 years,
Yeah.
and there'd be cases where I would get something on my desk that said a five-person company, the CEO complained about the experience with one of my team members. And within minutes, it actually comes from the CEO's mailbox to yours, and you better have a response. And I spent days actually chasing the CEO of this company to find out
Hmm.
what had happened because he never returned my calls.
Hmm.
But there's this inherent customer success element. So it's really about how do you define the outcome, the impact that you want as a company. And then
Hmm.
Salesforce had a principle called the V2 MOM, which
Hmm.
stands for vision, values, methods, obstacles, and metrics. And
Hmm.
many Salesforce diaspora have taken this and put it into different companies
Hmm.
because that set of parameters was something you would define up and down the company, from the
Hmm.
CEO down to every employee would have their own V2 mom. You might change it actually mid-year. You actually
Hmm.
relook at it because everything was changing so fast, which is
Right.
reflective of the
Right.
environment we're in again today. But really having that and having customer success as the why you do what you do, I think between them really led to the outcomes of the amazing growth and trajectory at Salesforce.
Well said. And when you compare the established enterprises and startups that you have led, what differences have you noticed on how leadership must adapt across large companies and startups?
So when you have a lot of change,
Hmm.
I think in both cases you need to be agile and you need to figure out a plan. But
Hmm.
I found that in the two startups where I was COO, they were very young teams. They had never actually seen the downturn.
Hmm.
And so what you had was deep panic when things, because things will always go
Correct.
wrong.
Hmm.
There was deep panic. And so being able to hold the course and manage through the chaos and really have a steadfast way of showing the path forward, I
Hmm.
think is very, very important when you're in a startup environment.
Hmm.
And when you're in a very large company, I think the larger the company, the harder it is to change, right? Because if it's a large company, you're trying to really steer a very large ship and make
Hmm.
it pivot. And so in that case, also you need the plan, but it's very important that you have to figure out what needs to change in the vastness of that company. What are the
Hmm.
most critical elements that you have to change? And then how do you convince others so that you can bring
Hmm.
them with you that it is the right strategy and you need to make it happen? So that's how I
Hmm.
would differentiate the two.
Very interesting. And when organizations are going through periods of rapid change, how do you align large and diverse teams?
So, I come back to what I'd said about it's about do you define the why, right?
Correct.
And so if you can figure out the common company goal, objective, outcome,
Hmm.
that is how you then align the team. And again, the V2 mom was super helpful in saying, how do you draw line of sight for your function,
Hmm.
your organization, to say what on my radar has to happen to
Hmm.
ultimately be able to see clear line of sight up to what the company needs to be successful.
Hmm.
So I think that that is, to me, the most effective way that I've seen a diversity of teams
Hmm.
all line up against the same outcome. And again,
Hmm.
having customer success at the center of everything makes it much easier, right?
Hmm.
Because you're going to figure out
Absolutely.
to be successful sustainably as a company, your customer had better be successful. And
Hmm.
what are you going to do to get it there?
Hmm. Well said. And what role do empathy and organizational culture play in driving performance and innovation?
So at the end of the day, the muscle that drives being able to take a risk, even if there's failure at the end of it. That is a really important one for a company to develop and to
Hmm.
encourage in its people. It has to become an inherent part of your culture. So
Hmm.
how do you create a mentality where people are ready to experiment? how do you create it in a way that you are structured about how you approach it? So
Yeah.
my boss at Salesforce was the vice chairman of the company, ran all of distribution, and he had a wonderful approach to structured innovation,
Mm,
right? So you define what you're going to try, you define a time frame, define an objective, and then you measure it. And if it
mm,
works, you expand it, and if it doesn't work, you kill it, right?
right.
So I think that those are things that if you can get the culture to encourage risk, but in a very calculated fashion,
Hmm.
because then you can move quickly to what is going to give you success.
Mm, amazing. Let's now move on. Chitra, you serve on the boards of Infosys and Vimo and have served on several others. How do you decide where you can make the most impact as a board member?
So there's a saying that goes, if you've seen one board, you've seen one board.
Correct.
And it's so true. Between different industries and different sizes, and is it public or is it private? I think all of those add a nuance, which
Mm,
might then change how you add value. So for VC-backed companies, what you're going to be doing is advising quite often on
mm,
strategy and how you take that strategy through to execution. And
right.
it's often a matter of how do you do less? How do you focus? I was recently having a conversation with a board, and it was all about, is this too many things? Can you really do a new set of products and new geographies and new
Mm,
segments at the same time? Or should you get more structured about, again, how you think
mm,
about your strategy? And when it comes to very big companies like Infosys, of course, you have general responsibilities and accountability around the fiscal, the performance, around risk, around governance. But beyond that, I think what's important is picking the three or four things that you are going to double down on.
mm,
So at Infosys, I spent a lot of time on M&A. Like,
mhm,
how do they think about doing more of that? I've spent energy on how you use sustainability as a critical point of differentiation with your
mm.
customers. And
Yeah.
now the company is winning deals on the basis of what they can bring from a sustainability perspective to the broader IT and AI digital services deal.
Mm,
And so those are examples. Women in leadership is another thing where I spend
right.
energy. So I think that's the difference when you get to
Mm,
large boards versus the very small ones.
mm, mm. One of the big concerns a lot of people in India now have before they accept a non-executive board position is the incredible amount of fiduciary responsibility that even non-executive board members carry. Does that bother you also sometimes?
Do you know, I know India actually is more extreme on that dimension, as
Yeah.
I understand it, than other geographies.
Mm,
And so there's a question as to say how much is the right amount
mm,
of that
mm,
responsibility.
mm.
But I think it is important that a board member, at least from a conceptual standpoint,
Yeah.
is accountable for the company's fiduciary responsibility
Mm,
and its performance,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the buck has to stop somewhere. And so
Correct.
I feel that it's reasonable to say, the duty of loyalty and the duty of care are the two
Mm,
elements that a board member is required to
yeah.
have.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the right ones.
Well said. In your view, Chitra, what defines effective governance in today's technology-driven environment?
So right now, especially with AI, so much is changing,
Yeah.
and it is very important that the board understands how that AI strategy is being designed, how every different function and part of the company is
Mhm.
going to affect that. It can't happen in a silo, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about one part of the company deciding to do something, whether it's product and engineering on how things are coded, whether it's the go-to-market functions on how you
Mm.
work with your customer,
Yeah.
whether it's legal, security, they all need to be engaged.
Yeah.
And there need to be processes in place that help you define risk, whether it's financial risk or legal risk that might come from bias or cyber risk that might come from an AI you're deploying.
Mm.
Um, you need to understand how it's being managed within every function and then across the whole company. So I think it belongs to the whole company and it belongs to the whole board. Do you
Mm.
know this whole idea that should there be an AI expert that doubles down. You might have an AI expert, but that
Yeah.
does not absolve the whole board and the whole company from needing to be part of that governance.
Hmm. Amazing. You also chair the ESG committee at Infosys. How are boards balancing environmental, social, and ethical priorities with growth and profitability?
So at the end of the day, if a company needs to be sustainable in the
Mhm.
long term,
Mm.
sustainability is a very important feature of survival and success.
Yeah.
And so, just to give you a few examples,
Mm.
which says, okay, this is really something you have to do, not just because you're being a good citizen, but for the survival and success of your company.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research. The first thing that I will name is a lot of research that shows that diversity on executive teams in companies and on boards
Mm.
actually is very closely correlated to financial success.
Mm.
McKinsey's done research where they did the math, and
Yeah.
it shows up to be true. There is a company called Elf Cosmetics. The CEO, Tarang Amin, has shown many, many quarters of really strong growth with a very diverse board. So
Right.
I think that that's the first. The second one is customers do care about how a company is affecting the environment,
Mm.
and they can and do vote with their wallets. And the third is a company that is not sufficiently focused on data privacy and cyber, for example,
Mm.
will lose the trust of customers and will ultimately fail. So I think those
Mm.
are three examples
Yeah.
because honestly, ESG is very, very broad, right?
Correct.
Environment, social governance. But in each of those, you can see these examples and why it matters.
Correct. Correct. Great examples. Thank you. You've also advised companies on how AI is shaping go to market strategy. What excites you the most about AI's potential in business?
So, the early days of AI were a throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. And that is no longer the case.
Hmm.
But if it's done right and you can prove the ROI, you can actually affect every dimension of your go-to-market. You can
Hmm.
affect your prospect experience
Yeah.
because there can be mass customization that is targeted at you and relevant to you.
Hmm.
It can improve the customer experience because you might get better speed to answer, more accuracy. You have your data more available, so it can be a much less frustrating process.
Hmm.
The employee experience in sales, for example, can get much more efficient and much more effective
Hmm.
because they get the right information at the right time. It takes some of the more mundane aspects of recording information out of their jobs.
Hmm.
And so you can see that at every point of the go-to-market spectrum, AI can come in and help. And it will depend on the segment, right? In some cases, some things will be more automated, especially for small business or for consumers.
Hmm.
Um, for enterprises, it's going to be more how is it AI assisted? But at
Hmm.
the end of the day, just to emphasize, my view is human in the loop is absolutely critical, whether it
Correct.
is in the checking, the
Hmm.
validation,
Hmm.
the managing for bias, managing it for drift, all those things are critical. And so I think there'll be to different levels,
Hmm.
depending on the specific complexity of the task, the risk associated. But irrespective, even a fully automated process will continuously need human in the loop to check it.
Hmm. Amazing. Time for three more questions for you. As a
Mhm.
co founder of the Salesforce Women's Network at Neythri, how do you see inclusion and representation shaping the next generation of leadership?
So I have a lot of passion on the topic of women in leadership.
Yeah.
And if you look, it feels like every next generation of women make it better for the
Hmm.
next.
Yeah.
And it's important that we continue that evolution.
Hmm.
Three elements that I would suggest here that are most relevant. The first is there's a broken rung. So McKinsey has done extensive research with Lean
Hmm.
In for the last, I don't know, 12, 14 years.
Hmm.
They call it the Women in the Workplace Study. And what they've identified is that from the move from individual contributor to manager, that is the broken rung. And so
Hmm.
I think building awareness and then looking at best practices about how you can think about correcting that,
Hmm.
whether it's providing the right training, whether it's providing the right opportunities. I think that
Hmm.
is definitely something that can take that further.
Hmm.
The
Mm.
second is around entrepreneurism. There are notoriously not enough women entrepreneurs, but this next
Correct.
generation, I get women coming to visit me in their
Mm.
20s and their 30s that want advice, that are much more fearless about going there and trying it. But if you actually look at it, the funding is a tiny fraction of what is given to men
Mm.
in the entrepreneurial area. So I think
Yeah.
that's another dimension where we continue to build awareness and need to keep
Mm.
doing that. And the third is around really how women learn to invest, right? For South Asian women especially, but women in general, they tend to be less present on the investing front. And I
Mm.
think that is another critical element of how do you make representation better as we go to the next generation.
Mm. Amazing. Two more questions, and these are now for you personally. Um, how do you personally stay curious and continuously learn in such a fast evolving world?
I think I came to the conclusion a while ago that I am either blessed or cursed with permanent beginner's mind.
Hmm.
And so for me, I always have curiosity about
Yeah.
everything. I am always asking why.
Mm.
Uh, and when I got feedback from another board member, and they thought hard and said, "You ask really good questions." So for me, learning new industries, new functional areas has always been a source of great satisfaction. And with AI specifically now, I'm fortunate that I'm on the board of Infosys, which is leading the charge for
Yeah.
many of their customers on AI related services. So I've been able to actually learn through Infosys, not just about governance, but
Mm.
I also believe it's really important if you are a board member, especially, that to truly be able to ask the right questions when it comes to
Mm.
AI governance and
Mm.
opportunity and risk, you need to learn to experiment with AI yourself. And
Mm.
so I did things like for my nonprofit, Neythri, early this year, I wrote the whole board charter. I wrote the CEO job description, the board member descriptions, all those things. When I run a panel of questions, I will start with asking AI what the right questions is given an
Mm.
audience. But
Mm.
more recently, I actually decided to take the next step, and I was playing with something called HeyGen. And HeyGen, basically, you feed it 3 photographs, 4 minutes of unrelated recording time, and I said, go look at the Neythri website and build me a short pitch video. And so I learned a lot about what it can do. Some things are
Correct.
amazing, lip sync, hand movements, but they
Mm.
could not figure out the this Indian plus overlay US accent. It failed miserably. So I feel like it gave me a very good understanding of some of the limitations.
Mm.
It ignored some of my directions. It changed the color of the shirt. I didn't ask it to. All that I think gives you very firsthand
Correct.
knowledge, and I think it lets you be more challenging and more understanding of what
Mm.
AI, for example, can
Mm.
do.
Absolutely. I love your phrase, the permanent um, beginner's mind. I think this is such an amazing phrase to have. And I've been fooling around with HeyGen myself, and it's quite a fascinating platform. But my last question for you, Chitra,
Oh, I
if you
have a
could,
question.
yeah,
Did
sure.
you figure out how to make HeyGen sound like yourself? Because after that, I spent hours on it, and finally I asked GPT or Gemini, and they finally admitted that actually people with different accents, not, if you were completely different accent and more typical of an Indian accent, maybe it would work, but that lots of people had the same problem I had.
No,
So
but I'm
did,
going to tell you what I'm doing with a digital twin, but after our recording,
okay.
which has been done for me, where we figured out about my Indian accent. But my last question for you, Chitra, if you could share one piece of advice with emerging leaders navigating technology, change, and purpose, what would it be?
So I'm going to give two pieces of advice.
Yeah.
One leads to the other. The
Mm.
first one really is around stay agile
Hmm.
because so much is going to keep changing faster than ever before. So watch your competition, support your people,
Mm.
and be clear on what outcome, what impact you're seeking, which
Mm.
leads to the second thing, which is again, always stay focused on the outcome and the impact, focus on the why.
Yeah.
And as we talked about, we talked about how customer success is one example of that, but that will help you figure out how you always make it better and
Mm.
how that why is evergreen, irrespective of what else is changing.
Amazing. And on that note, and your amazing piece of advice, thank you, Chitra, for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me at such length about leadership, culture, governance, and so many other aspects that my viewers and listeners would just love to keep listening to and learning from. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.